How's it going, everybody? Really excited to welcome Jerry Byrne to the Philocrosophy podcast. Jerry's the head lacrosse coach at Harvard, and really fired up to welcome you back to the show, man.
Yeah, you can say again, Jamie, if you start getting comments from your fans and subscribers and say, can you not have that guy anymore? Just let me know. I got thick skin.
I think you're the only person who's been on more than twice, and I think this might be like our fifth podcast we've done.
We just, we're two guys who like to talk.
No doubt. Last night, we should have recorded our conversation. I mean, that would have been an awesome podcast.
Yeah, some of the best, as they say out in Hollywood, some of the best scenes end up on the cutting room floor. That's why I always watch the director cut. I always watch the director's cut because, another 30 minutes of a pretty good movie, it's not going to hurt it that much, but there might be some gold in there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're searching for is a little gold. Last time we spoke, it was sad times, man. We were just in the beginning of this pandemic, and it was crazy. And now we fast forward ourselves 6 months, and things are sort of a little bit under control, but certainly not normal. How are you doing, and where are you? Are you in South Bend or are you in Boston?
I'm in an undisclosed location in Cambridge. Actually, it's Ted Bergman's bachelor pad. Ted's one of my assistant coaches our goalie, and helps us on defense. He's done some Jamie podcasts. His dojo is pretty legit. We might have to do a little tour later. It smells like single man. A little Drakkar Noir. Some underwear on the floor, scented candles. It's pretty cool though.
A lot of toy soldier discussions.
Toy soldier goaltending, of course. There's a couple of toy soldiers on the shelf over here, and it's really cool. Those Will Corrigan, Ted Bergman, and Neil Hutchinson all live about 1.5 miles from each other in Cambridge. And Cambridge is a pretty big place, so it's pretty funky, all the different squares that they have. And so I'm about 6 miles away, but we're kind of rotating our apartments and doing our meetings that way.
Nice. Love it. I've crossed paths with a lot of the Harvard staff this summer. Will drove from California back to South Bend and then back to Boston and made a stop at the Munro residence. We had an awesome, I believe it was a 3-on-3 plus a goalie game with my daughter and a few of her friends. And it was phenomenal. And so it was always great to see Will, his dog, and his new fiance.
All right. Did Bailey, your dog, do any moving pics on anybody in that game?
Bailey looks out the window and is very interested, a little tentative because he's turning 14 in about a couple weeks. So 14, that's like, do the quick math there. That's what is that, 88 or something?
It's 98.
98. He's really old. So
yeah,
the last time you and I crossed paths, though.
No, he didn't make 14 because I basically murdered him in South Bend when he mumboed me.
So for people that don't know what Jerry's talking about, at the end of 10 weeks of quarantine, the Munro family were kind of losing our minds, and we rented an RV and we drove from Denver to Narragansett, Rhode Island, where we spent an incredible month of June. It was like an oasis from the pandemic. But along the way, I had the great idea that we would play a lacrosse game in every state. And so when we were in Illinois, leaving the truck stop where we slept that night, I called Kevin Corrigan and I was like, hey, we're going to be coming through. We need a game. He's like, you got to stop in South Bend. And he's like, Jerry's around. I'll get him. So we ended up having a matchup, a 3-by matchup. And the teams were me, Bernsey, and Emily versus Lucy, Casey, and Colin. And I went back and actually checked the film because we did film it. I checked the film and Lucy scored the game winner. We ended up losing. But the play of the game actually did happen were from the dogs. So my dog Bailey was wandering around. When he wanders, he's old. He looks kind of like all the – you remember in the movie Halloween when like Michael Myers and all the crazy people are like wandering around the streets and when Michael Myers escaped? That's how he was kind of wandering through the game. And he inadvertently mumbled the crap out of Bernsey. And Bernsey fell like slow motion backwards. He got tabletop basically, and it was unbelievable.
Yeah, me, you, and Emily are on it. Okay. Hey. Flip it. Look at me.
Oh my gosh! Oh no!
Oh my gosh! Oh no!
Oh my gosh! He just jumped out of the car! Oh!
Oh my gosh!
I got tackled by your ancient dog who snuck up behind me. And, I've been coaching the moving picks from your philosophy of, the hybrid stuff that you've been teaching. And basically your dog has been taking it all in and found the perfect movement for the guy who's been like talking about moving picks and stick grabbing and interference from two-man stuff. It was the ultimate revenge from your dog.
It was. Honestly, it was scary because the dog like crumbled underneath you. I mean, the dog can hardly walk. His hips are like literally he walks diagonal. He doesn't walk straight. He walks like literally, he likes like a sidewinder. That's, if you watch the film, and I'll send you the film, it's pretty impressive. But the most athletic player in the game was definitely Cliff.
Cliff, made a Steve McQueen like escape from my car, leapt out, saw the action going on, had to lock him in my car, and he was tracking the whole game, and then he just said, I've had enough of this. So him and Charles Bronson, he dug a tunnel and got out of the car, and then next thing you know, he was chasing every ground ball.
And he got every ground ball.
He did.
But luckily, we were playing in the middle of the parking lot behind the Joyce Center. So it was actually kind of helpful to have him, because when there would be a missed pass or something, Cliff would go get it and we could just get started with the other ball. But actually, KC was saying that you were calling that he would always give the ball to you. So like Cliff would get the ground ball every single time and then give it back to our team.
Cliff has been trained really well in my backyard and my front yard. So that guy knows where his treats are coming from.
Man, when we had to get back into that RV and keep driving through Indiana, it was sad. That was definitely that was the highlight of the trip. Playing a lacrosse game in every state was actually kind of a highlight. We stopped at the Vince Lombardi rest area on the New Jersey Turnpike because we were at this point just in a hurry to get there, and we just didn't feel like making anything special out of it.
I think the quote of that is, funnel cakes aren't everything; they're the only thing.
Oh man, it was just such a freaky time because like the world was just still like totally locked down and just the paranoia of getting out of the RV, but you just had to get out of the RV. It was shaky. It was loud. The dog freaked. Part of the problem was the dog was freaking out the entire time. He wouldn't sit down. He stood up for the first 10 hours of the trip. And the guy is like, at the time was the equivalent of like 92. But a highlight of summer though was PLL. So obviously you had to have been rooting for your Redwoods. Give me your opinion on what you saw, what you learned, what you were thinking about. Your tweets, by the way, I just want you to know, I screen copied every single one of your tweets and I've added them to my coach's training program. So, I mean, I don't mess around. There was some good information there and I got little explanations on what I thought.
I'll be waiting for my lacrosse philosophy, beer koozie. For as far as payment, no, it was cool. It was, I think it was, the convergence of, again, we all watched the MLL and did that, but there was so much build up for the PLL, and we had just started watching the high school stuff, as well, because that had just started a couple weeks earlier. But, at that level, you hadn't been with your team since, the early to mid-March. So it was like everybody was jonesing hard
Totally.
to watch these games, and they had been promoting it, and they did a really good job of that. And so, I think for lacrosse people, it was like appointment viewing. It was like Friends in the early 90s. People were just, or Sopranos or Game of Thrones, or
Yeah.
depends on how old you are, The Wire. And so, everybody was, watching, and we were on vacation on the Cape, and our whole crew, we had a house rented with family and friends with like 12 people. And we were all like huddled around this small TV in the rental house we had. So it was cool. I really enjoyed it.
All right. So tell me some things that you kind of took from it, some things that you noticed that you were interested in, or that you thought were cool, or really, whatever was kind of catching your eye.
I think more interesting was the difference between the stuff that was happening last year was not happening as much or at all this year. I think there were a lot of 2-pointers from defensemen in the first year.
Yeah.
And probably less. So, I think that's obviously better coaching, and they had all this, everybody had all this time from March, regardless of what you were doing in your profession, you were preparing for July. So all the coaches obviously watched film and did assessment of their opponents. And so, a kid like Newman, for example, I'm not sure he took a shot. And I think he had like 5 or 6 2-pointers last year.
Yeah.
Something like that. And so all those teams that had defensemen who were shooting, I thought that was kind of curtailed significantly. But I also think that part of that was also driven by the fact that the subbing was much more improved. So you had, whether you liked it or not, you had offensive minis who were going down to play defense. And so you didn't have as many fast breaks and unsettled that you had last year. So either as a function of better coaching or having the film from last year and how you gave up goals, I think the substitutions were better. It wasn't just guys turning and running to the box. I think they rode a little bit more. So I think it created much more of a 6-on-6 game. There was still some unsettled, but I don't think as much as last year. I think, you saw, I think, much more selective, big, little, and inverts and matchup stuff. The shot clock felt like it was going faster.
It did.
And I think part of that was because teams were cutting out the fast breaks. And I commented on this multiple times.
Yeah.
Defensemen were clearing the ball more. Yes, offensive middies were trapped down there with D middies. Most D middies aren't offensive threats. There are a couple of guys who are. So if they stayed too long or the defenseman carried too much, but you had like a 30-second functional possession, and that's really hard to score. And I think some of the defenses were really good. Were built for 6-on-6 defense, and so I think situationally there was stuff like that that really caught my eye. The number of bounce shots, I think was way up, particularly from the 2-pointers. I thought the goalie play wasn't, and again, I think this is a function of intelligence and better coaching, is that I wouldn't say the goalie play wasn't as good. I think that the shooters were better. They didn't take as many bad shots. I think last year was much more about entertainment value and I think this summer, not that it wasn't about winning, but I think this summer was particularly about, hey, we got a couple of weeks together. We got to be strategic. We got to be tactical. Let's not take bad shots. So those were some of the things that popped to mind. You copied all my tweets, so maybe you'd have to remind me of some of the
I know. I was just thinking I could dig those up. But I do remember you talking a lot about shot clock and getting off, defense personnel getting off more quickly. Do you see that as an impact in Division I lacrosse? Same way?
I think you always have to make, your philosophical decision on how you're going to play based on the talent that you have. And for us as a building program, we want to instill this concept of riding which and I'd be riding to substitute. But if you don't have that mentality, then guys are just going to turn and run to the box, and you'll ride one down and go 3 deep with your attack, or 1 down and 2 deep, and you're just trying to buy time. So I think you have to start with this kind of convergence of your mentality and your talent depth, and then figure out what you're going to do from there. I think, I think you saw more two-way stuff, either out of necessity or situation, or, hey, my guy's staying, so I guess I have to stay. So, yeah, I think maybe some players learn that they have that capability to do that, and they can play defense for 30 seconds, which is not that long, or that they can do it situationally, and those situations may benefit the offense or the defense. You'll figure it out. So I think there was an epiphany for some players.
Yeah. I did see Schreiber, Holman, and Manny stuck on defense for a shift. And they got the stop.
That's one of those situations where all the guys are head, like you talk about your head being on a swivel.
Yeah.
It's never a good sign when your guy on ball is looking for his slide guy already.
The on-ball guy, exactly.
He's looking around like,
the on-ball guy,
I don't hear
on
anybody.
Here we go.
Hey, are you guys back there? Are you guys ready to help?
It's me.
So, yeah, that's always a good sign. But I think, you either learned you could do it and you want to add that to your game, or you learned how to survive it. But, I think the two-way mentality is both a skill and a strategy, but it's also a mindset. You have to recruit that mindset, and you have to hammer that mindset even before guys get there. You have to tell them to stay on the field on their club team when their club coach is telling them not to. They got to go to their high school coach and say, "Coach, I want to take wings. I want to play man down. I want to stay and play." Because my college coach, Coach Byrne, telling them that I got to learn how to do this. We're talking about your relation last night, who's coming to Harvard, and I want to see that guy play some midi and defensive midfield. And so because changing that mindset is really hard. Like when we started at Harvard this fall, we were doing some riding and clearing stuff. Like we were literally like crossing guards at the box, saying, like, we were doing a drill with some dummy offense into a set of clear, and guys, we were like, stop. I felt like Kevin Bacon in Animal House, all is well. Don't panic. All will be well. And then he gets run over by the people. That's what it was like. Like we were telling guys to turn around, get back on the field.
And they're like running off the field.
Yeah, like the box ain't moving, man. Turn your ass around, get back out there and play defense. So yeah, hopefully they won't get me fired.
Did you notice? Did you feel like it seemed incredibly packed in defensively in the PLL, and particularly early? And I think it opened up a little bit, but I wanted to get your opinion as to why you think that was. What's your take on that, or did you not?
No, I think defensively, if your offensive shape starts like that, it's really easy. You're starting from a condensed position, so that just that serves the defense. So I think a lot of it is spacing and initial dodge, initial spacing, initial shape clarity from the offense. Like, all right, what are we in? Where are we starting? And what do we want to try to happen? Because if you can make a team slide and recover twice when you only have a 30-second functional possession after, the defenseman clears the ball and stays too long, or the D-midi comes down and he holds the ball. Like, if you only have 30 seconds and you make them and you can slide and recover twice, you're probably going to get a shot clock violation, which there was probably more shot clock violations in this iteration than there were last year. Partly it was guys weren't taking bad shots, but part of it was the better substitution, riding, and the over-carrying from the defensemen and the D-middies. But I think a lot of the packing in from the defensemen wasn't a strategy from the defense. It was more of a function of, and again, you preach this, is if you're doing two-man or pair stuff, or what we call devil because of what Duke played, or we meaning in my old job, is you're just feeding the defense. You're doing a lot of these 45-degree angle meaning south-north or east-west, where you're coming off a two-man and your move is not parallel to GLE. It's running toward, the corner of the field, toward the midline. Again, yeah, if they screw it up and you get some hesitations, but you're going to have to regather yourself and reattack now from a great angle. So I don't think the two-man, when it was bad, it was really bad. But when it was good, it was really good. And I think a lot had to do with the initial shape, the initial starter dodge, and the angle of that.
I kind of felt like it had a lot to do with the fact that the ball just wasn't moving. And so, like, if the ball stays on one side, the backside is going to be in anyways. And then if the ball really doesn't move or it stays on that side, even with a pass, ball movement will spread a defense out. And same with the two-man game. If you look at when the two-man games look great, like for the Chaos, when they looked good, they were swinging the ball and it looked like box lacrosse. I mean, the stats are out there in box where if the Georgia Swarm, Jordan McIntosh did a talk. I don't know if you were there a couple of years ago at the convention at that pro night, in which he was like, hey, when we swing the ball 3 times, our statistics of scoring, our percentages are much, much higher. And I think that's really kind of what it's all about, is like the ball movement itself has to happen. Otherwise, the defense has an ability to just pack it in, they will naturally.
Well, this is like, if you think two-man is about you too much, then the ball doesn't swing. If you think on the first time you run it that they're going to screw up the pick or screw up the hedge or go for the elbow pump fake, or, if you refuse to pick and try to come underneath, if you think it's going to work the first time, which is what Jordan is talking about, then there's a confidence there, maybe a selfishness, but if you defend that well, you're going to steal like 3 to 5 seconds from that
Totally.
position.
Exactly.
If you not only are you guarding the guy, but you're all over his hands, and he can't get rid of the ball, and now he's got to carry another couple of steps, and then the swing is really more survival than a swing versus. And again, I don't know this stuff as well as you, but I went down and spent a couple of days with the Swarm thing, is that you're going to know within a step or two where the benefit is.
Yeah.
Is there a benefit? And if you keep on dodging and re-dodging, that's, and I think that's what you saw when it was bad. But, for the Chaos, they also had, 4 to 5, Native Americans and Canadians on the field. And they're going to be good at it. When you see it not run well, it's usually not because they have 4 Canadians out there doing it.
When I remember 5 years ago, my son Colin played intermediate lacrosse, and the coach there is this guy, Pete Tellis, really smart guy. And he literally wouldn't let the guys feed a pick and roll. If you did, you might get hooked or you'd get yelled at, even though there were successful pick and rolls sometimes. But it was like, I don't want you feeding a pick and roll. I want you swinging it. And it was in the spirit of the defense is going to rotate towards where that pick and roll is going. And if you don't feed that and you swing it, now when the ball swings, the roll man is still open. And that's your nation's look, and you can still feed that guy. And meanwhile, you've created difficult approaches on the other side from the slough in. And I think in the end, the concept is, you don't have to necessarily have that rule, although that makes sense. But I think the concept is don't play out your pick and roll to the bitter end. Because if you do, you're just killing time on that shot clock. And if you swing it, you're going to know pretty early, like you said. There's going to be a pretty good indication you've got something.
Yep.
But when you kind of feel like I don't, you're give and go when your nation's looks are there, and then you can feed. It's like feeding the feeder.
No, and you're getting you're getting a change of the side of the field. I think a hash to hash pass, side to side, is, oftentimes I refer to that as a skip pass, even though it's not like your traditional.
Right. It's like
because you're changing sides of the field. The ball's traveling a long distance. It's forcing you to shift your attention and your chin and your torso and your feet in all these ways. And so, I think it comes back to, two points I want to make. When I was coaching against Brownie at Denver, I called it deception because I liked that they would dummy a 2-man or a 3-on-3 in the corner of the field.
Yeah.
And then because they had such great sticks, they'd fire a 25-yard pass. And now they have this temporary 3-on-3 and 4-on-4. which I think is just brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, and we would have these massive, chess matches between, he and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him, but we'd be screaming deception so that our guys would steal a few seconds, don't get distracted by this shiny object over here, which is this dummy 2-man. We'd be screaming deception and try to shift our attention and our, the composition of our off-ball shape to the side of the field where the ball hasn't even gotten to yet. So we'd be practicing screaming deception. But I remember in 2008, we played, when I was coaching at Notre Dame, we played the Canadian national training team at Orchard Park High School in Buffalo. And that was the first time I'd seen nations, like the pick, the transfer to the other side and hit the roll man on the cut to the middle. Like, I remember being at halftime in that game. I'm like, I'm effing my guys so bad. I'm like, I can see that coming. What the hell are you guys doing? So, but that's the brilliance of, it's not about you in that moment. It's about shifting the sides of the field, swinging it, and then taking advantage of what that side-to-side skip pass, that new imbalance, what that creates for the offense and the challenge for the defense.
Right. And what people don't realize too, the nation's look is when there's a switch and the picker cuts to the net. But when there's no switch, the give and go is just as open as the nation's, because the defender on ball that's not switching is still getting chipped. And so you're way better off getting it back than trying to dodge all the way in there.
Yeah, no, I love that. You saw it. There were a couple of, I think Jordan McIntosh scored on something like that in that game. He gave up the ball, his defenseman relaxed, and he just sprinted past him. So, but it does make me remember that Brownie did score a nation's goal at
Mile High Stadium.
Bronco Stadium, yeah.
Yeah. I was on that game. It was a timeout right before the half.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Talk about getting MF'd. You probably got MF'd on that one.
I got MF'd. I was MFing myself. I was MFing myself because in 2008 he had done that to me because he was coaching on the Canadian team. And trust me, for the next 10, 11 years that I coached at Notre Dame, we practiced that every game. I don't think it ever happened again. I'm knocking wood. Hopefully we won't play Denver in the future.
Let's talk about, I think, my favorite player in the TLL, Eddie Glazner. I mean, it's unbelievable watching that guy play. There's nothing better than like watching him get mic'd up. And I don't want to rip on anybody else, but when other guys are mic'd up, there's like 3 words spoken sometimes. And with Eddie, it's like literally, it's just like this nonstop conversation, maybe a little bit more urgency than in the descriptor, but it's unbelievable.
It's it's awesome. Eddie's special, because as you know from coaching for a long time, very few guys. Everyone's always asking you, Coach, what do I need to do? What can I do? I'd like to help the team. Sometimes I want to, they ask if they can play more. Whatever that conversation is, you've had hundreds of them. I've had hundreds of them.
Yeah.
And you have that conversation. You give the 3 to 5 things that you give them, and some guys do them, some guys don't. Some guys don't do it enough. Sometimes guys don't do it well enough. But I gave them those 3 to 5 kids. I said this on another podcast that he called me. I was on whatever the bridge in San Francisco is. What's the bridge in San Francisco?
Golden Gate
Bridge. Holy moly, I'm getting old. I can remember movie lines, but not the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm on the Golden Gate Bridge. I was with some college buddies, and he called, and I gave it to him. I gave him the things, and he did it. And I told one of the things I told him was I wanted him to be a PhD in our language and our PhD in the defense, because you're a good cover guy, but your greatness is going to be as a guy who can tell other people what to do and have a command of what really good off-ball defense is. And he did it, man. And now I've said this on other podcasts, is that, that's what you should aspire to be if you want to be a great defenseman, because not everybody's gifted with, elite feet or whatever, good genetics, bone structure. Like Eddie's got Eddie's a good looking guy, he's put together, but he had to work for those things. And he made that happen. So if you're a defenseman the 99.9% of defensemen out there, that's a guy you should study.
Totally.
He's got a command of the language. He knows what's going to happen before it's going to happen, or the potential scenarios of what's going to happen. He knows where his guy is. He knows where your guy is. He's telling you the things to look out for. And, and that's how I coach, because I know that everyone's going to have 99.9% of the body types and the athleticism on defense. Like, you need guys like him.
Yeah.
And he's embraced it. He's immersed himself in it. And again, I think if I was the national team coach tomorrow, he'd be the first defenseman I would take.
Yeah, I think I would do the same. His ability to process in real time is amazing. And if you watch anybody who's out there, and this is going to be a bad memory in some ways, Jerry, but it was an amazing game. It was the semifinal game, which really you could have called it the national championship of 2015, Denver, Notre Dame. And watching the Denver offense that were so loaded and doing so many things, and watching you guys just, step for step, punch for punch. If you watch how many decisions these defensemen had to make in that game, and the processing that was going on with all the stuff you're talking about, 2-man over here, a swing over here, Zach Miller redodging on this side, kicking an inside hand ball to X to Cannizzaro, who's kind of hanging up Landis, and the whole thing was just unbelievable. And I think the reason why I bring it up is because it's not just your ability, being loud is obviously really important, but you have to be able to process it. And I want to talk about, like, how do you do that? How do you teach that? How do kids learn that? Because it's like thinking on your feet. You got to be able to think on your feet and be able to react quickly.
It's probably a lot alike when you start building up 2-man stuff from the like one side 2-man. Like, all right, here's a pair on one hash, and you probably take guys and gals through. Here's the initial here's your initial dodge. Here's where you're reading where your defenseman is, and maybe he's looking where you think the pick angle is coming from, where the hedging defenseman, where is he? Like, you got to teach guys all that stuff and gals all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to become good at, all right, am I slow dodging this and hesitating? Am I coming off of it hard? Am I coming underneath? Am I stepping away and elbow faking? And you're teaching. I do the exact same stuff. But, for me, when I'm teaching it, I'm not only teaching the 2 guys who are on the side with the ball. I'll work in 1, 2, 3 guys in the beginning on the other side of on the other hash, who are watching the reads that the off-ball defender is doing, and that's going to create how you play that or screw it up, or how well the dodge is. All those different scenarios creates pressure on guys who might not even be in the frame of the film. And so we'll, for example, we'll practice the pick and roll, and Epple was particularly gifted at this. If he was so Duke ran what we call devil, their pairs, and Ronnie was really good at, much like Brownie, kind of every year adding a new different wrinkle to screw with the defense, is that Duke would throw back a lot on that. And if Epple was responsible for the guy at GLE or below X, the way we taught it, that he would spike up the hash.
Yep.
And take and get ball pressure on that guy quickly. So an adjacent slide by a coach who teaches crease slide. So that was a wrinkle that we developed to counter some of the wrinkles that they were doing. So we would practice all the different scenarios of all the things that could happen. So that's how you teach it. Eddie was really gifted at it. Epple was good at it. Sexton was good at it. Lando was great. All those guys were really good at it. But you become good at it because, like Eddie, you're watching A happen and already thinking about B, C, and D, while still keeping an eye on your man and filling space and doing all that stuff. So you practice the iterations just like you would do.
You know how, like, you're in a conversation and then, like, an hour, you're thinking about it an hour later and you're like, damn, I could have said this and it would have been really, really a good comeback or whatever. That's what practice is all about, because when you're in the games and you're like an hour later, man, I should have made that spike. That's why you have to just rep that stuff. And having watched you guys practice over the years, not so much at Harvard, probably more at Notre Dame, but I'm sure it's similar philosophy. The scenarios that you're putting your players in are real, and I want to make a comment about how much you really are coaching your defensive guys on the offensive side almost as much as on the defensive side. Will you talk about why that's so important?
You know, I think it's benefit, you know, like, listen, we all only have so much time to coach, only so much time for film, almost so much time on the field with them. So yeah, I think you got to find ways to maximize reps. And I think that, you know, having defensemen go against defensemen within these scenarios, like complex scenarios, you start simple and then you build up, you know, complex in the sense of, hey, you play on Saturday and you play Duke on Saturday and you got Denver on the next Saturday. That's, you know, that's complex. And so, you know, you're trying to do reps, you're trying to get as much out of 2 minutes as possible. So if we were doing, you know, like Duke likes to dodge right on the middle of the field, they would do some of their pair stuff. At the end, they would get Deemer or Miles or any of their, you know, Smith. Like they would dodge right in front of the goal at like 16 or 17 yards, trying to bait you to come adjacent and have their attack creep up to the GLE and get all 6 of their guys in really dangerous spots. So we practice that dodge, covering that dodge. We practice the language adjacently and crease, but then we would do it with, you know, Glaze being covered by Landis and Landis covering Glaze. So they would know what that would feel like, because I also wanted, the benefit is I want the defensemen, because they're playing the role of Deemer or Miles, I want them to see what they see. Even though they're not as good at them as offense, they'll have an appreciation of the pressure on the slide guy, on the GLE defenseman, on the adjacent defenseman. Because if you have that empathy, that gives you an extra benefit, so that when you flip roles and you go from being, you know, Deemer dodging on the Z line right in the middle, right on, you know, 18 yards and right in front of the goal, and now you got to go be a GLE defenseman or the slide increase defenseman or an adjacent help guy, you know exactly what Deemer is thinking about in his feed and his shot. And that's a huge benefit to me. But I do it incrementally in pieces and build out from the pieces, so that when you bring it, like, you know, I'm like, you know, people, you know, part whole, I'm like crumb of the piece of the part of the whole. I like teaching because I think that helps guys understand.
Yeah, really cool. Let's oh crap, let me think. I had something that I want to talk about Landis in a second, but there's one other thing, so we'll edit this part out. Shoot, what was on my mind? There was something. Oh yeah. So one thing we saw a ton on PLL Island was a lot of reverse V holds. And so what do you call that? A Revo hold?
Yeah. And your boy Joe Keegan giving you shout outs. I'm like, people are like, that's your thing. I'm like, oh, what can you do?
No, I am always a footnoter, you know, so I footnote you. I called it in my blog. I talked about it. I footnoted you. I think he didn't footnote my footnote.
That's, you know, that like a Chaminade back in the day, that would be an automatic F. Like, these young kids don't understand. Remember when you had to write papers? Yeah. And the hardest thing about the paper was the footnoting.
At the end.
Comma. You know, the bibliography was one thing. The footnoting on the page, where you had a comma and a semicolon and you could get an F quickly on that. So
you could. And it was 3:00 in the morning and you're done with the paper, and now you got to spend all this time on the freaking footnotes and the bibliography.
You're like, you had your elements of style. You had your Strunk and White out. You know, you're like rifling through that. No, like the reverse V hold, I think, like, it was one of those like happy, like a lot of stuff, you know, it's not, you know, this, like, you just stumble onto some stuff just out of pure luck, or just like recruiting, some of your best guys or some lucky happenstance, right? And so the reverse V hold, Steve O'Hara, who was, you know, just one of my all-time favorite guys, was a first teamer, and, you know, like a lot of guys that I like, linebacker, and, you know, great pursuit guy, good athlete, super high IQ, kind of Eddie, like kind of Glaze before. Like, I think Glaze learns a lot from Eddie, and I've never said that but Glaze, modeled himself, I think, a little bit after Steve, and Steve would do that. Steve, it was strong. He was a middle linebacker at St. Joe, and he was put together, man. And he would get guys in the Revo, and I remember being like seeing that and be like, man, I got to teach some guys don't do it very well. It has to be a certain kind of athlete. Like Landis never had to do it. Those guys, it's usually a pretty good athlete who moves really well and can anticipate quicker guys' moves and gets to really good spots. Steve would do it at guys at like 2 and 2, like right before posting up, and he was really good at it, and that was kind of the genesis.
Yeah.
But then I thought it became really a good thing to teach D middies.
Totally.
Jack Neer became really good at it. Drew Shantz became good at it. Carlson Milliken, who was a complete savage, who transferred from Virginia and played for me at Notre Dame, was ridiculous at it. He would get guy in a V-hold and throw them to other places.
It stops the lefty in their tracks is what it does. It's like it just stops them. They're like, what?
And then you practice, like guys would try to do it when they had no ball pressure, which doesn't work. You fall down a lot and the guy rolls and you fall down or you get called for a hold. You had to do it from like he did it on Milliken did it on Donahue from Denver in one game. Like it was definitely a hold, and I think I can still hear Bill calling for it, but like he murdered that kid. And so, but I think it became more of a thing for D middies for me. But you had to do it from, and you're starting to see guys do it right near GLE against inverts and stuff. And so, it's become, but you have to do it from ball pressure, because if you wind up from too far away, a really good player is going to roll and split, and you're going to look foolish. But I'm a big fan of it, but not everybody can do it. We had a kid at Harvard, Chris Roto, who was a D middie for us, who was really good at it. And ironically, I got Milliken, Shantz, and Jack Neer on a Zoom call with my D middies at Harvard, and I think they might have talked to him about it. He became really good at it.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and you're right. It's easier for a shorty, and I think it's really important for a shorty to be able to do, because it actually gives you that left on right or right on left opportunity to apply ball pressure in a way that guys aren't really used to. And it's a very strong position. Now with poles, it works really. I mean, there's a lot of guys that were doing it. Rowlett did it really well over the course of the tournament. BJ Grill, he was kind of funny, because I sent him a text in the middle of the tournament and welcomed him to the V-hole club, because I saw him going left on left against somebody. It might have been against Gutterding or something like that, and he's going V-hold. And then, but I'm like, why don't you love the V-hold? Because he's all over his reverse V-hold.
Yeah. Well, what you were seeing a lot was the guys who were doing the reverse V-hold is that they were also reaching for takeaways. And like, if you do it well, and you can also kind of reach across the guy's chest and kind of rake the ball to the ground. So you saw some takeaways in there.
Like a reverse ding dong?
A dong ding. A dong diggly. I think that, like guys starting to V-hold is a cool, like, you and me, we're holding it down.
I know. There's a few other people out there that are V-holding. A lot of guys were, honestly. The V-hold, what people don't realize, and you said this.
Jamie, you have to have the trust that whether it's a cross cage help or a crease help, like I talk a lot about, we've talked about this. What I say is kind of dual directional trust. Like if I'm taught to do A or B or whatever it is, I'm really sometimes only going to do it if I think C, D, and E are going to happen. So you have to practice that. Yet, like everything else, you have to practice that trust.
Yeah.
You have to practice the slides on a roll and things like that. So the dual directional trust becomes, you're not going to get guys to do the things that you want them to do on ball, because their ego is always going to be in their head about, well, if I do this and my guy doesn't support me, I'm going to look foolish and give up a goal. So you have to, the only way you take out that ego is teach your other guys to do the right things. You got to practice both sides of that coin.
Yeah, no doubt. One thing that was interesting watching the Epple-Rambo V-hold matchup. And Rambo is just such a beast. I mean, obviously, MVP last year, and you could argue he was the best player in the tournament also. But you do see the value of the left-on-left matchup of Epple. And I think the guy Finn Sullivan, he switched over. Eddie was telling me that they convinced him to start using his V-hold, and he was, he kind of grew up as a cross-check hole guy, but he made, he got welcomed to the club. But what was really interesting when you watch, and I've watched these clips a bunch of times of that matchup, particularly with Epple, and it was like his hips were slightly below the hips of Rambo, so he didn't have an easy underneath spin move while the ball pressure was coming from his V-hold. His feet were continuing to move. He wasn't relying on his stick to stop him. His feet were continuing to move, but lefties are not used to being guarded by lefties, particularly with V-holds. And so it kind of allowed the Redwoods defense to slide even and help and show right to Rambo's face, but it was hard for him to feed because of the ball pressure. And I just wanted to get your opinion on that, because I think a lot of people are afraid of V-holds because they feel like, well, I mean, if I turn them, it's going to happen too quickly. And I think if you do it the right way, you can, like you say, capture the guy.
Well, that comes back to that trust. If guys are worried about a question mark or an inside roll, like, first of all, Eddie definitely was not probably subtle. He's like, you're V-holding that guy.
If you want to be on our team, you're going to V-hold. Did you hear his podcast with me?
He knows the.
If you don't V-hold, you're a fucking idiot.
It's the Henry Ford school. If you can do it any way you want, as long as it's this way. So, No, I thought that kid played. I thought Finn played really well too. I think that Epple and Rambo. Garrett covered him a couple of times in college, I think, and did really well. I mean, those games were like 5-3 and 5-4 or 6-5. So I don't think anybody. I think their defense is unbelievable too. That was the really cool part. Cool. I always said that to Kevin Connery and Tills, like people would be like pissing and moaning about those games. I was 5-3 or 6-5. Like we had a 4-year run where I don't think nobody scored over 7 goals, and so and people would complain and be like, you know what, you're just looking at the wrong things, man. You're looking at the wrong things. It's beautiful defense at both ends of the field. Great goaltending.
Yeah.
Think about the defensemen in those games over like a 4 or 5 year period.
Oh, they're phenomenal.
Earhart, Muller, Dunn, the D middies, Bernhardt, Landis, Glaze, Epple, Sexton, Shantz, sick games with Bernlohr and Shane Dawson, great goal. But I digress. Is that I think, the key part when you're V-holding a guy is not crossing over your feet. I call that getting scissored.
Yeah.
Like when so for a lefty on a lefty, that would be Epple's, if his left foot gets higher than his right foot. So then if Rambo question marks or inside rolls, you're in big trouble, even if you have a slide. So the key, what you're talking about is finding your feet relative to Rambo in a way that if he tries to step through, you still have ball pressure. And if he rolls or question marks, you can drop step. And so, Epple happened to do that really well. And Garrett, when Garrett does simple things, he's as good as anybody. It's when he got out of character with, he's a good hitter. Like he had some late hits and stuff like that, but he's a physical guy. But when he started trying to be a takeaway guy, it's just not it's not in your character. And so, but I think that's what he did. And what he does is that when he doesn't cross over, you're not vulnerable to the inside roll of the question mark. When you can trail a little bit and send a guy off at an angle, a tangent relative to the crease, then that guy becomes a feeder or in a less dangerous part of the field. So right. That's what you want to look for, Jamie, for you as you're coaching it, anybody who's listening, is that watch that leg swing.
The scissors.
That's a problem.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. You know who I was really impressed with on the other side of the ball, former Notre Dame guy, was Ryder Garnsey. I thought that guy stepped up in a situation where, you know, they didn't have Jules. And Jules is like a massive threat, you know, arguably as good as anybody in the league as a playmaker. He can do it all, really. He's an on-ball playmaker. He's an off-the-ball playmaker. He's a feeder. He's a scorer. He's very two-handed. And all of a sudden, Ryder, you know, had to really carry the load. And, you know, Cav was too, but I thought Ryder ended up like really doing an unbelievable job. He was scoring one-on-one goals every single game. Those are the hardest ones to come by. And you think of a guy like that as more of a finisher. But I just wanted to bring that up as a former guy that you coached.
Yeah, no, I think when they were playing really good offense, the ball was spinning and swinging, you know, because it's really hard in that league to score against the really good cover defensemen.
It is.
And if you're spacing, so if you're, again, if your spacing's not great and you're not like a guy off the end line who's breaking ankles, you need the ball movement to help lengthen the approach for the really good cover guy and give you an opportunity. Like when they weren't playing good offense, you know, him, Cav, and Ryder were, you know, 5 and 6 step moving and jabbing and trying to, and there was no space.
Yeah.
And the approach was too short for the defenseman. When both of those guys scored one-on-one, it was mostly because what the other 4 or 5 offensive guys were doing spatially and not gluing up and moving the ball quickly.
Yep.
Now you're starting your dodge a couple yards from GLE or a couple yards from the hash, and the defenseman, instead of a 3-yard approach, has a 7-yard approach.
Yep.
That's what everybody needs. And I agree. When they had that, they were really good one-on-one dodges. When they didn't have it, they were gluing up and rocker and faking and trying to come walk the dog, and the space wasn't
they
there.
might not have anything.
And the cover and the cover defenseman, and that if there's a condensed offense with a really good cover guy and a guy who's not a, you know, burner off of a dot, doesn't have that long approach, that's when the offense struggled.
Switching gears, about 1 year ago, you know, next month, middle of September, I took a trip to Boston. I was on a little lacrosse tour, and my buddy Mark Blake, his son Graham plays for you, and he had front row tickets to the Who on Friday night, September 13th, and then Saturday night, you and I got a chance to go to watch Billy Joel, you know, back from your old hood, at Fenway, and yeah, exactly, it's not a great podcast with us if we're not talking a little bit about music. The pandemic has just ruined these opportunities. Me and Mark and our crew with Brad Bowman and Shawnee Allen call ourselves the Wolf Pack, and we go to concerts all over the world. And those are on hold right now, sadly. And so is your concert going. But man, that was a good time, wasn't it?
It was a great time, and you know, I think, you know, what people don't know about Jamie, besides being a great friend and, you know, lacrosse connoisseur, you know, taking his family all over the country on these trips for music and lacrosse is, you know, it's, you know, pretty cool. And getting to do it now with your family is pretty cool when we're all spread out. And so, yeah, it was great when Jamie came and visited, because we were surviving just our first September 1st. And so we were all over the place with recruiting and starting starting our, you know, our time on the field with our players at Harvard. So yeah, that was a great, you know, break for Jamie and I. And, you know, Billy Joel is from Hicksville, Long Island. Shout out LI out there. And you know,
where did you go to high school? Where did Billy Joel go to high school?
He went to Hicksville High School. So he actually grew up right behind.
So with like Ronnie Caputo?
You're gonna have to ask Ronnie that. You know, Ronnie might have been, you know, holding.
Ronnie's a little younger, I think.
Ronnie might have had his jean jacket, you know, in his closet. But no, he grew up right behind Holy Trinity High School, which is right on the border of Levittown and Hicksville. And so, yeah, no, that was really cool. I you know, the following December, after I went to Billy Joel with you, I took my wife to the Madison Square Garden show, and took my daughter Rory and one of my nephews, and so yeah, that was really cool. And
that was. And shout out to Jenks. Shout out to Jenks, Dave Jenkins, for hooking us up with the tickets.
Absolutely, my fellow former Boston Cannon teammate got us tickets, and so but Jamie videos the songs that he likes. So Jamie's probably got 1,000 songs. So you can at least go back, not just in your mind,
I have
but
to.
on your iPhone to recapture really good songs and really good moments. So Jamie, when Jamie, when you pass on, you might want to pass your music, your iPhone music collection to some music aficionado out there.
I think I put them all in my blog. 2019 was an unbelievable year with Elton John, Eric Church, Rolling Stones, The Who, and Billy Joel. Unbelievable lineup.
And Neil Young. Did you go to Neil Young too?
No, not that year. It was a couple years back.
So no, listen. I think people have kind of reconnected to a lot of the things from their past that brings them joy. Like when you get to our age, we all get nostalgic.
Yeah.
Young kids are always rolling their eyes and mud. We haven't listened to that song yet, but you are trying to reconnect to something that brings you joy. And the fact that you can't go to concerts, you do the next best thing. You listen. You pull it up on YouTube or Spotify, or find a concert. And I watch a lot of concerts on YouTube. Like I'll think of a band and I'm like, I'm in that mood, and the commercials pop up and everything, but it does connect you to a moment and friends and music that you liked at a certain time and maybe still do. So that was a great time. Jamie and I got a lot of lacrosse in. We did a podcast in my office.
Yeah.
I think we might have worked out. We went to the show. We caught an Uber together. We in the rain. We talked about lacrosse then after that game. So that was a great day.
That was. So by the way, did you watch those music movies that I told you about? My buddy Mark told me about it. Muscle Shoals. You seen that?
Yes, I watched Muscle Shoals.
And when we were brothers or whatever, that movie about the band.
Yes, I watched. And I read Lee Von Helm's biography. I've read Robbie Robertson's book. I've watched The Last Waltz 20 times, and so like one of the things that I've kind of tried to, I think an epiphany that I've had in my own personal life, during the pandemic, is that you got to be open to a different point of view, whether it's politically or culturally or with people, whether it's letting go of, arguments that you have with people, but something simple like to connect that was, the general perception about the band was that Robbie Robertson selfishly wanted to, do soundtrack movies and get into movies, and he wanted to do what he wanted to do, and he decided that he didn't want to do the band anymore. So that's the mythology. And then, so when you watch, that doesn't really come out in the band, but it comes out in the books that you read, or you read any of these blogs about it. And then you watch When We Were Brothers, and it's like, these guys were total drug addicts, and I wasn't really into that singing. And I had a family, and I had a wife and a kid, and, I just didn't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So like being open to different interpretations of, not like fake news or stuff, but more like that there's different ways of looking at stories.
Yeah, kind of like V-hold and cross-check hold.
I like V-hold and cross-check hold. We talked about that with Landis. We talked about that Landis, I let Landis cross-check hold more, mostly because he could. He didn't have to. He was a freak athlete, so he could drive guys longer with the butt end than before he had to V-hold guys.
All right, last topic. Let's talk a little bit about recruiting in this pandemic. It's been a weird summer, not being able to watch guys play live. How has film, given you a different perspective on recruiting, and what's it going to look like, do you think, for you guys or for the general population as it relates to this this September 1st coming right up?
Well, I mean, I think the club guys and their technology partners have done a really good job. Other than a few starts where you had guys with funky uniforms, that it was their numbers were like Stonehenge from like the numbers were like, I thought you said 12 inches. The numbers should be this big.
Yeah.
So after we got through that glitch, the rosters were better. You were able to create a library. My assistants, Coach Hutchinson and Coach Corrigan have done a great job of watching, hundreds of hours of games and then giving me the suggestions of things that I needed to watch. And so, I think the club guys did a really good job. I think the videoing was done really well. So I think they worked really hard to make it easy for us. I think the hardest thing, to be honest with you, was watching the MLL and PLL and then going to watch a club game.
Yeah.
It was like underwater lacrosse. You're like, holy moly. So
that's why June lacrosse always looks like crap after championship weekend. You're coaching your guys all spring, and all of a sudden you're watching like, a 17-year-old.
Exactly. So
fast.
Yeah. So, and the same things that were the problem in the PLL, spacing, over dodging, bad defense, are still true in the summer. So that's always been a hard thing. It's been, figuring out defensively what I like and what mistakes is a guy making that I can live with and coach out of him, and which things are just endemic to his game. So that becomes harder watching on film. It's not been easy, and you try not to make mistakes. You can't do, for the 22s, you can't do any sort of investigation beyond cursory conversations. So you really don't know about character and, besides skill. So I think there's going to be a lot more mistakes potentially made by people because of the pandemic. And, some teams, because of the larger rosters and all these transfers and seniors coming back on a lot of teams, I think recruiting, I think some of these teams are going to be massive for the next couple of years. And I think even more if you have transfers and seniors coming back or upperclassmen coming back to do their extra years that the NCAA is going to give them, combined with, having to recruit this summer by just exclusively watching film. I think some teams are going to adapt by having even bigger recruiting classes. So you're going to see teams with 55, 60 players on their team, not in the Ivy League, but in the non-Ivy leagues. And again, it's not a pejorative. I just think that's nature. I think facts. I think teams are just going to do that. And so at a time where expenses and budgets are under attack, so you have bigger team and less money to spend on them, and probably less flights and more regional games. And can you bring 2 buses for a team when you're trying to cut? If you have 60 players on your team and your budget's getting shrunk, so that means less team. Probably more of an Ivy League model of who's traveling with 30 people, 32 people. And so I think the Ivy League model is potentially a pathway for lacrosse going down the road, but that's going to be a tough transition for the non-Ivy budgets and non-Ivy, philosophy around recruiting and things like that. So we're getting ready for September 1st, and emails and texts and phone calls and all of that. And we're really excited. I think there's a lot of momentum and excitement about our program, and I think a lot of credit to our, Coach Bergman, Coach Kyle, Coach Corrigan, Coach Hutchinson. I think we're really prepared, and I think there's a lot of interest in where Harvard can get to.
Have you found watching so much film that you've got to be watching more film of players than you would have otherwise watched? Fair?
Yes.
And you didn't get to watch them play live. And what is it that you can't see from your perspective on film that you can see live, and vice versa?
I think I'm watching, because I'm not watching, because Coach Hutchinson's my, kind of recruiting coordinator. And so he's kind of watching everything and filtering and straining stuff for me to watch. So when I'm watching, I can watch closer. So I'm probably watching more because you can rewind. Like when you're sitting on that chair on the sideline and it's 114 degrees and you've got a pile of waters and a bagel wrapper at your feet and you're surrounded by other coaches, you're distracted and things like that. When it's just you and the screen, you're really paying attention. So I think I'm picking up a lot more detail than I would typically pick up when I was watching on the sideline. So I'm not watching as much as I would when I was an assistant coach, or as if I was on the road recruiting as a head coach now. I think I'm watching the games I'm watching because he's kind of curating that for me. He's like, watch this game against that guy or against that team. And so I'm kind of pretty dialed in. So I'm not watching as much, but I'm watching closer and deeper.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the advantage of film. I mean, if if anybody asks you after a game that you coached, what did you think? It's kind of hard to give an answer other than, well, I'll let you know after I watch the film, because whatever you thought was good wasn't that good. Whatever you thought was bad wasn't that bad. It's the same thing in recruiting. You can get wowed by people in person, but then you can go back and watch the film. They're like, you know, it was pretty good, but it's not that good. But I do think it's hard to see explosiveness, bursts quite as well. It's like you said, because you're just used to watching other athletes on TV, even if it's NFL athletes. It's like you're just used to watching Sports Center.
Yeah.
And so, but when you get on a field, you're like, man, that kid's got some pop, you know, and it's a little bit harder to see that.
Yeah, no, I think you try not to judge too harshly. You know, you don't want to be dismissive, although there's comfort in saying, you know,
he's not good enough.
Thumb down. You're like Maximus, you know, you're like this. And so yeah, you want to not be too dismissive. And you also, like I said, you know, which things are fixable, which things are endemic to his game, having limited by the kinds of the conversations we can have, so we don't know some of that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, you know, if the spacing on some of the PLL possessions were bad, watching some of these club games wants you to rip your retinas out. You know, it's like, so as a Dodger, you're like, you know, that guy probably could have ran by that guy, but the adjacent guys were killing his space. So,
yeah,
you know, I'll get highlight videos from guys and be like, Coach, I shut down this guy. And you're like, you watch the video and you're like, you were about 6 or 7 times or one step about getting away from getting racked when the adjacent guy sloughed down the hash and took away that space. That's not really you dominating that guy.
Yeah.
You know,
it would just add a 2-point line to club lacrosse. I think, you know, you'd see better spacing. Those adjacent guys would be stepping in for their twos, man, and people would have to get out on them.
I think if more guys hired you to help them run this 2-man stuff, because it spawned so much bad that it's almost like, you know, Coach Will Corrigan, you know how much respect I have from you. When it's done well, it's crazy hard to coach against, but you know there's a lot of bad out there, and it's crushing the ability to evaluate some of these guys, because the defensemen are killing space. Guys aren't getting out of the way. They're not setting good picks. They're not popping. They're over carrying. And so, yeah, I think for some guys, the bad spacing makes a defenseman look better and an offensive guy look worse.
How much can you tell or not a defenseman's ability to communicate when you can't hear him?
You know, listen, that's why the Simon Says drill is so key. Like, if you can't be loud, you can't play. You got to practice it like any other skill, you know.
But on film,
what's that?
On film, there may not be audio, right?
No.
I was telling some of the kids that I work with in my Jan3 athlete program, like, to mic up. Be Eddie Glazner. Let's see how it goes. Let's see what happens. Maybe you don't have to share it with everybody, but if you mic'd yourself up during a game, it would be pretty darn interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no. There's, you know, the club coaches, I think, have a good motivation, some better than others, to coach and do practices and things like that. But, you know, they're running a club for a living. I not necessarily would consider them X's and O's coaches for a living. And so, and then you throw the pandemic into it, and then, you know, all the customer service work that they had to do to salvage the summer and events and things like that. And so, yeah, not surprisingly, the lacrosse hasn't been great.
I want to create a little public service message from you. If you could tell a club organization what offense to run based on what would allow you to get a really good look at a defender or a defense, what would it be? Or what wouldn't it be?
You know, it's probably like some sort of 10 set, some sort of umbrella set, because you can be wide and high. You can open up the inside for a lot of stuff. You can easily teach your attack different kind of actions. You can dodge from, you know, the low wing, the corner, and the alley, top center. And you can do two-man stuff out of it where you're popping people from the inside and vacating space. I think it's not complex like Sanskrit, but as I tell Steve Govett every time he's talking about Canadian offense, I text him. I'm like, yo, man, it's not Sanskrit. You can the Americans can figure it out. So you don't want to make it Sanskrit, but you do want to create space and create speed and create reads for the offense. Because if there's reads for the offense, then there's reads for the defense. So probably a 10 set.
And the 10 set, by nature is high wing dodges that can also turn into low wing dodges. And I agree, because wings just give you so many more options and more space. When it's alley, what ends up happening, it's like an easy early slide. It kills the play. The ball carrier is like at the hashes in like 12 yards. He's got nowhere to go with the ball. He runs away. It takes forever. When you dodge those wings and you kick it, you can get it moving. You can swing it across the top 2 passes, extend that defense a little bit, like we were talking earlier in the show, where the ball movement will spread people out and give you some looks.
But I don't. You're not seeing a lot of attack action. You see. Maybe there's a clear through on the dodge side.
I know. That's worse is when there's no clear through. It's like if you don't clear through for somebody, you are literally killing the coach's opportunity to see everything, anything. You're not going to see anything. You're not going to see on-ball defense. You're not going to see off-ball offense. You're not going to see dodging. I mean, it's brutal. That's why those 1-3-2s, honestly, the 2 out top, 1 crease, wing X wing setup is kind of. It's not a bad set. It's a good offense and all, but it's kind of brutal because as soon as a lefty doesn't get through, it's over, right? And everyone's like in the way. And then the X guy comes all the way over because they're like trying to they're overplaying their outlet. And next thing you know, his man's in the way, and you just can't see on-ball defense because no one's getting out of the way.
Yeah. So, and I just don't think they're not teaching. I mean, you should have. It's not that hard to have 3 different attack actions. Based on.
At least 2, like clear through and fade, right? I mean,
Yeah, clear through, fade. What do can you pop out your crease guy to the backside and fill with another one of the perimeter middies? So, so I just so as a result, I think the offense has been worse this summer from the summer events, which makes defensemen look better or harder to evaluate. And if you're an off-ball offensive guy, you're not getting your end of play opportunities as a dodger or a scorer. So it's
exactly. So how are you going to read the guy who's like an unbelievable off-ball guy?
And so as a result, when you get these highlight videos, it's a lot of unbelievable plays, and you don't see a lot of unbelievable plays at a college level. If you have to rely on unbelievable plays, you're going to lose a lot. So
what do you think about this idea of doing a breakdown? I do this for a lot of the athletes I work with. I'll break down a tournament for them into like all of their touches, and we'll watch that. But I was thinking like if I were a coach, I don't want to see just the unbelievable plays. Although, it's fine to look at a highlight video and get, see if you're interested or not. But to be able to have somebody break it down for you so that you can actually just look at, all of your on-ball opportunities on defense, all of your touches on offense. That would be.
I've done this with defensemen. I've asked them, don't send me a highlight. Send me all the 6-on-6 possessions from your game against so.
Yeah.
I have, Coach, my coaching staff right now ripping apart, there's a bunch of really good goalies in the 22 class. I'm like, I want to see the lowlights. I want to see the goals they gave up. Because is it a technique thing? Was it, hey, that was a layup? Was he on the ball and the guy just made a really good placement? Like, we evaluated their highlights and the games that they played in. So I want to see the goals that they gave up. Was the guy guessing, or was it just he had no chance? Okay, but he made a good move on the ball. Like He was patient and quiet, So we're doing a lowlights right now.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you're a goalie, people have said, well, should I send goals that went in? And your general answer would be like, of course not. But at the end of the day, you can evaluate a lot from whether the goalie was, patient and moving in the right direction and just a little bit late, because the nature of the position is that's going to happen.
Right.
But, if you're completely going the wrong direction all the time, You know, particularly the guy that's making the miraculous low save all the time, but then is just dropping every time before shooters even.
Right. His highlights full of those low opposite angle saves because he's cheating and dipping, you know, and you're never seeing we brought this up with a kid recently, and I'm like, I don't see any stick side high saves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's dipping and cheating, you know? And maybe that's where he's giving up his goals, you know. Yeah. So
well, I mean, the guys that are pretty quick, you know, that is where you're probably going to get them. I mean, remember the 1998 gold medal game, USA Canada, where the Canadians came back from like down, you know, 12-5 or something like that, and Sal's in the net, and every single goal went stick side high because they were shooting leaners like crazy, and Sal was so quick, and he was great stick side high. I mean, listen, he's arguably the best goalie ever, but it's not necessarily an indictment when it goes in. But if the point is, we need, you know, if you're going to evaluate somebody, you really want to see more than just the highlights and more than just the saves, for sure.
Absolutely. So so I'm a big fan of looking at failures. I think they give you a peek into the soul.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Jerry, so great talking lacrosse with you, talking music, talking movies, talking dogs, talking recruiting, talking V-holds. I mean, you know, it's just the whole gamut.
It's awesome, man. And thank you. And it's always fun. I look forward to when we're at a concert together again or sitting in the office, you know, face to face, and be well and give my best to your family. You got a great crew. It's always great.
Thanks, man. You too. Tell your whole crew, family, and assistants I say what's up. And I'll probably be in Boston sometime this fall. We'll see you then.
Awesome, Jamie. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.